My name is Connie, and I am 67 years old. For 38 years, I never missed a single one of my son Derek's birthdays. Not one. From the moment the nurses placed that tiny, squirming baby in my arms, I made a promise to myself that I would always be there. Always. But this year, my daughter-in-law Andrea called me with a voice as cold as winter ice and told me I was not welcome at my own son's birthday celebration. What she did not know was that the luxury vacation home she loved to brag about existed because of me. Before I share what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. And if stories about family truth and standing up for yourself speak to your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Now let me tell you how a mother's love was tested in ways I never imagined. Let me take you back to where it all began, because to understand what Andrea did to me, you need to understand who I am and what I sacrificed for my son. I grew up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. My parents were hard-working folks who taught me the value of every dollar earned. I met my husband, Harold, when I was 22 years old. He was a tall man with calloused hands and the kindest eyes I had ever seen. Harold worked as an electrician, and he was one of the best in the county. People called him from 3 towns over to fix their wiring because they knew Harold did things right. We got married in the spring of 1981, in a little church with wildflowers on the altar. A year later, Derek came into our lives. I remember holding him for the first time, this perfect little boy with Harold's dark hair and my mother's nose. In that moment, I knew I would do anything for him. Anything at all. For 12 wonderful years, we were a happy family. Harold worked long hours, but he always made time for Derek. He taught our son how to ride a bike, how to throw a baseball, how to be a good man. I worked as a bookkeeper for a local furniture manufacturing company, and we lived a comfortable, simple life. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, everything changed. Harold was working on a commercial project downtown when something went wrong. They told me it was an electrical surge. By the time the ambulance arrived, my husband was gone. Just like that. 41 years old, and the love of my life was taken from me. Derek was only 12. He stood at his father's funeral in a suit that was too big for him, trying so hard to be brave. I held his hand and promised him silently that I would never let him down, that I would be both mother and father to him, that I would make sure he had everything he needed to become the man his father would have been proud of. The years that followed were not easy. I kept my job at the furniture company, but the salary was not enough. So I started taking on extra work in the evenings, doing bookkeeping for small businesses, tax preparation for neighbors, anything that would bring in a few more dollars. I would come home at 6, make dinner for Derek, help him with his homework, and then sit at the kitchen table until midnight, working through stacks of receipts and ledgers. Derek never complained. He understood, even as a teenager, that we were fighting for our future together. He got a part-time job at the grocery store when he turned 16, insisting on contributing to the household. I told him to save that money for college, but he would sneak it into the grocery fund when he thought I was not looking. There were nights when I was so tired that I could barely keep my eyes open. There were moments when I wondered if I was doing enough, being enough, but every morning I would see Derek's face at the breakfast table, and I knew that everything I did was worth it. Throughout all those years, there was one tradition I never let go of: Derek's birthday. No matter how tight money was, no matter how exhausted I felt, I made sure his birthday was special. When he turned 15, he had been talking about a certain bicycle for months, a blue 10-speed that he had seen in the window of the sports store downtown. It cost more than I could afford, but I took on extra clients for 3 months, working until 2 in the morning, some nights, just so I could see his face light up when he unwrapped it. When Derek turned 21, he was in California for college. I could not afford to fly out often, but for his birthday, I made an exception. I baked his favorite chocolate cake in my kitchen, carefully packed it in a cooler, and flew across the country just to surprise him. The look on his face when he opened his dorm room door and saw me standing there with that cake is something I will carry in my heart forever. Birthdays were not just celebrations in our family. They were promises. They were my way of telling Derek that no matter what life threw at us, he would always be loved. He would always be celebrated. He would always have his mother by his side. As I climbed the ladder at the furniture company, eventually becoming the head accountant, I became smarter about money. I invested carefully, saved diligently, and lived well below my means. I drove the same car for 12 years. I wore the same winter coat for a decade. I did not need fancy things. What I needed was security. Security for myself, and security to help Derek if he ever needed it. By the time I retired at 62, I had accumulated a savings of approximately $800,000. Not a fortune by some standards, but more than enough for a comfortable retirement, and certainly enough to help my son if the need ever arose. But I never told Derek exactly how much I had saved. I did not want money to complicate our relationship. I did not want him to feel obligated or to treat me differently. I was just his mum, living in the same modest house in the suburbs of Columbus, driving my old reliable car, tending to my garden, and waiting for his phone calls. Little did I know that this financial secret would become the center of everything that happened next. Derek moved to Denver after college for a job opportunity in technology sales. He was smart, personable, and ambitious. Within a few years, he had worked his way up to a regional sales manager position at a growing tech company. I was so proud of him. Every time we talked on the phone, I could hear the confidence in his voice, the satisfaction of a young man building his own life. For years, our relationship remained close despite the distance. He called me every Sunday evening without fail. We talked about his work, his friends, his hopes for the future. I visited him twice a year, and he came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was not the same as having him nearby, but I understood. Children grow up. They build their own lives. A good mother learns to let go while still holding on with her heart. Then 4 years ago, Derek met Andrea. He called me one evening, his voice filled with excitement. He had met someone at a networking event. Her name was Andrea, she worked in marketing, and she was, according to Derek, the most amazing woman he had ever met. She was smart, ambitious, beautiful. He could not stop talking about her. I was happy for him. Truly I was. Every mother wants her son to find love, but I also felt a small flutter of something else in my chest. Call it intuition. Call it a mother's instinct. Something in the way Derek described Andrea, the way he seemed almost desperate to impress her, gave me pause. I met Andrea for the first time 3 months after they started dating. Derek flew me out to Denver for a weekend, and we all had dinner together at a nice restaurant downtown. Andrea was indeed beautiful. Tall, with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She had a polished smile and said all the right things. But her eyes. There was something in her eyes that unsettled me. A coldness. A calculation. When she looked at me, it was as if she was assessing my worth, adding up what I could offer, and finding me lacking. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself I was being unfair. First impressions can be deceiving, and I wanted to give her a chance for Derek's sake. The wedding came just 8 months after they met. 8 months. I thought it was too fast, but I held my tongue. Derek was 34 years old enough to make his own decisions. The ceremony was held at a fancy hotel in Denver, a venue that must have cost a small fortune. Andrea's family paid for most of it. Her father was some kind of investment banker, and they made sure everyone knew it. At the reception, I tried to connect with Andrea. I complimented her dress, asked about her work, offered to help in any way I could. She was polite, but distant. Every time I started a conversation, she found a reason to excuse herself. When I tried to talk to Derek, she appeared at his elbow within minutes, steering him away with some excuse about meeting her uncle or greeting the caterer. I flew home after the wedding with a heavy heart and a growing sense of unease. In the months that followed, things began to change. Derek's Sunday phone calls became less frequent. First it was every other week, then once a month. When I called him, Andrea often answered. "Derek is in the shower," she would say. "Derek is working late. Derek is exhausted. He will call you back." But the return calls became rarer and rarer. When I did manage to speak with Derek, our conversations felt different, shorter, more superficial. He seemed distracted always, in a hurry to get off the phone. Once I heard Andrea in the background saying something I could not quite make out, and Derek abruptly ended our call. I visited them once about 6 months after the wedding. Andrea gave me a tour of their apartment, pointing out all the expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, the view of the mountains. She talked about the restaurants they frequented, the trips they were planning, the life they were building. Everything she said seemed designed to emphasize how successful they were, how far above my simple life they had risen. During that visit, I tried to have a private moment with Derek. We were in the kitchen, and I started to ask him how he was really doing. Before I could get 2 sentences out, Andrea appeared in the doorway, announcing that we needed to leave for our dinner reservation. The moment was lost. At dinner that night, Andrea dominated the conversation. She talked about needing a bigger apartment, perhaps a house. She mentioned that her friend had just bought a vacation property in Aspen, and would not it be wonderful to have something like that someday? Derek nodded along, agreeing with everything she said. I watched my son that evening and barely recognized him. The confident, independent young man I had raised seemed to have disappeared. In his place was someone who sought his wife's approval before speaking, who deferred to her on every decision, who seemed almost afraid to disagree with her. But I said nothing. What could I say? He was a grown man. He had chosen this life, this woman. All I could do was love him and hope that things would improve. That night, in the guest room of their apartment, I made a decision. I would not tell Andrea about my savings. I had been considering mentioning it, perhaps offering to help with a down payment on a house someday. But something held me back. I wanted to see who Andrea really was before I revealed anything that might change how she viewed me. As it turned out, that decision would prove to be the wisest one I ever made. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening about 2 years ago. I was in my kitchen preparing a simple dinner for myself when Derek's number appeared on my phone. My heart lifted. He had not called in 3 weeks, and I was beginning to worry. But when I answered, I did not hear my cheerful son. I heard a broken man. "Mum," he said, his voice cracking. I messed up. I messed up really bad. My heart began to pound. I sat down at the kitchen table, gripping the phone. "What happened, sweetheart? What is wrong?" The story came out in pieces, interrupted by long pauses and barely suppressed sobs. About a year before, Derek had invested in a business venture with a college friend. His friend had pitched it as a sure thing, a tech startup that was about to explode. Derek had believed him. He had taken money from their savings, from credit lines, even from an advance on his retirement account. He had invested almost $200,000. The startup had failed. The friend had disappeared. And Derek was left holding a mountain of debt that he had hidden from Andrea. I sat in stunned silence as he explained. He had been covering the losses with credit cards, juggling payments, lying to Andrea about their financial situation. But the house of cards was about to collapse. Creditors were calling. He was 3 months behind on payments. And if Andrea found out, if she discovered that the comfortable lifestyle she believed they had was actually built on lies and debt, Derek was certain she would leave him. "I am so ashamed, Mom," he whispered. "I do not know what to do. I have ruined everything." In that moment, my heart broke for my son. Yes, he had made terrible decisions. Yes, he had been foolish and secretive. But he was still my child. And a mother does not abandon her child when he falls. "Derek," I said calmly, "listen to me. I have money saved. Quite a bit more than you probably think. I can help you." The line went silent for a long moment. "Mum, I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering." I spent the next hour on the phone with him working out a plan. I would transfer $350,000 to an account in his name. That would be enough to pay off his debts and give him a fresh start. But there was one condition. "Andrea cannot know this money came from me," I said. "Tell her whatever you need to tell her. A bonus from work, an investment that paid off. But not the truth. Not yet." Derek protested at first. It felt wrong, he said, to lie to his wife. But I held firm. I explained that I needed to know who Andrea really was before I let her know about my finances. If she believed they had come into money through their own success, I would see how she truly behaved. And if she ever showed herself to be the kind of woman who deserved to know the truth, then Derek could tell her. He agreed. And within a week, the money was transferred. What happened next exceeded even my cautious expectations. Derek told Andrea that a combination of a large bonus and a successful investment had given them an unexpected windfall. Andrea's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of suggesting they pay off their mortgage, build an emergency fund, or save for the future, she had one idea. The vacation home. Her friend had one in Aspen. She had been dreaming about it for years, and now finally they could afford it too. She found the property within days. A 4-bedroom cabin with stunning mountain views, just 15 minutes from the ski slopes. The asking price was $320,000. Derek called me uncertain. It seemed like too much to spend, he said. But Andrea had her heart set on it. And after all the stress of the past year, he wanted to make her happy. I told him it was his decision. The money was a gift, and he could use it however he saw fit. They bought the house. Within a month, Andrea's social media transformed. Suddenly, she was a lifestyle influencer, posting photos of champagne on the deck of snow-capped mountains of designer ski gear. She tagged luxury brands and talked about her blessed life. She hosted parties for her equally wealthy friends, posting group photos with captions about good vibes and mountain living. Not once did she mention Derek's mother. Not once did she acknowledge that an elderly widow in Ohio might have had anything to do with their good fortune. In her carefully curated world, success came from their own brilliance and hard work. I was simply an inconvenient reminder of more modest origins. As the months passed, my access to Derek continued to diminish. He was always busy, always traveling to Aspen, always caught up in the social whirl that Andrea had created. My phone calls went to voicemail. My text messages received brief, distracted replies. I began to feel like a stranger to my own son. I told myself to be patient. I told myself that Derek would come back to me eventually, that the bond between mother and son could not be so easily severed. But with each passing month, that hope grew fainter. And then came the phone call that shattered everything. It was 2 weeks before Derek's 38th birthday. I had already begun my preparations as I did every year. I had found a beautiful vintage watch at an antique store, the kind of classic timepiece that Derek had admired since he was a boy. I had spent weeks creating a handmade photo album, filling it with pictures from every birthday he had ever celebrated, from that first tiny cake I held up to his baby face, to the surprise party I threw for his 30th. I had booked my flight to Denver. I had reserved a hotel room. I had planned everything down to the last detail because that is what mothers do. We plan. We prepare. We make sure our children feel loved. My phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. When I saw Andrea's name on the screen, I felt a flutter of surprise. She almost never called me directly. For a brief, hopeful moment, I wondered if perhaps she was calling to coordinate the birthday celebration, to make sure my visit aligned with their plans. "Connie," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "I need to speak with you about Derek's birthday." Of course, I replied, trying to sound warm, despite the coldness in her voice. "I am so excited. I have already booked my flight for the 15th. There was a pause. Then Andrea said, "Actually, that is what I am calling about. We are doing something different this year. We are celebrating at the Aspen House, and it is going to be more of an intimate gathering. Close friends, important colleagues, people from our circle." I waited, not quite understanding. "And you need me to arrive a day earlier? I can adjust my flight." "No, Connie." Andrea's voice hardened. "What I am saying is that you are not invited. This is not really your kind of event. The people attending, well, you would not fit in. It would be uncomfortable for everyone, including you." I sat down slowly, my legs suddenly unsteady. The words echoed in my ears, but my mind refused to process them. Not invited. To my own son's birthday. The son I had raised alone, sacrificed everything for, never once abandoned. "I do not understand," I managed to say. "I have never missed Derek's birthday. Not in 38 years. Andrea sighed, a sound of impatience. "I know you have your traditions, but things change. Derek and I have built a different life now. A life that frankly does not really include you in the same way anymore. It is not personal. It is just how it is. Does Derek know about this? Is this what he wants?" "Derek agrees with me," she said smoothly. "We discussed it together. He thought it would be better if I called you to avoid any awkwardness." "You understand?" I did not understand. I did not understand at all. But the finality in her voice, the casual cruelty of her words, left me speechless. "I should go," Andrea continued. "I just wanted to let you know so you could cancel your travel plans. Maybe we can do something smaller another time. Just family." The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. 38 years. 38 birthdays. From that first moment in the hospital when I counted his tiny fingers and toes and swore to always be there, to now, excluded, dismissed, told I did not fit in with my own son's life. I tried calling Derek. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back, trying to keep my voice steady. I sent text messages asking if we could talk. No response. For 3 days, I existed in a fog of confusion and pain. I could not eat. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek as a boy running toward me with outstretched arms. I saw him blowing out candles, unwrapping presents, laughing at my terrible jokes. I saw all the birthdays we had shared, and I could not reconcile those memories with the silence that now surrounded me. My friend Margaret came over on the 4th day. She found me sitting in my garden, still in my bathrobe, staring at the flowers without seeing them. "Connie," she said, sitting down beside me. "You have to talk to me." What happened? So I told her. Everything. About the money I had given Derek, about the house in Aspen, about Andrea's phone call, and the silence that followed. Margaret listened with growing outrage, her face reddening with anger. "That ungrateful little snake," Margaret spat when I finished. "She is living in a house you paid for, throwing parties with money you provided, and she has the nerve to tell you that you do not fit in, Connie. You have to tell Derek the truth. He needs to know exactly where that house came from. I shook my head slowly. If I tell him now, it will look like I am using money to buy my way back into his life. Like I am trying to manipulate him. That is not the relationship I want with my son. So what are you going to do? Just accept this. I looked at the roses I had planted the spring after Harold died. They had struggled that first year, beaten down by late frosts and hungry deer. But I had tended them, protected them, nurtured them back to health. Now they bloomed every summer, beautiful and resilient. I do not know yet, I said quietly. But I refuse to believe that the son I raised would truly choose to cut me out of his life. Something else is happening here. I just need to figure out what. But even as I spoke those words, a small, terrible doubt had taken root in my heart. What if I was wrong? What if Derek really had changed so completely that he no longer wanted me in his life? What if the boy I had loved and sacrificed for had become a stranger? The days passed slowly. Derek's birthday came and went. I did not send a card, did not call. For the first time in 38 years, I did nothing. It felt like a small death, a piece of my heart breaking away and drifting into darkness. I watched Andrea's social media posts like an observer at my own funeral. The photos showed a grand party, elegant decorations, beautiful people raising glasses of expensive champagne. Derek stood at the center of it all, smiling beside his wife, surrounded by friends I did not recognize. There was not a single mention of his mother, not a single acknowledgement that I existed at all. That night, I cried for the first time since Harold's funeral. I cried for the son I seemed to have lost, for the daughter-in-law who despised me for the years of sacrifice that seemed to mean nothing. I cried until there were no tears left, until I was empty and exhausted. And then slowly something else began to grow in that empty space. Not anger exactly. Something quieter than that. Something stronger. Resolve. The call from Emma came exactly 1 week after Derek's birthday. I did not recognize the number at first and almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. Mrs. Connie, a young woman's voice, said hesitantly, "This is Emma, Andrea's niece." We met at the wedding a few years ago. I remembered her. A sweet girl, barely out of her teens at the time, who had complimented my dress and asked me questions about Derek's childhood. She had been one of the few genuine people at that wedding. "Yes, Emma. I remember you. How are you?" "I am okay," she said. "But I wanted to talk to you about something. About what happened at the birthday party. I do not know if I should even be calling, but it has been bothering me so much, and I felt like you deserved to know." My grip tightened on the phone. Know what Emma took a deep breath. I was at the party, at the Aspen house. And Andrea, well, she was drinking a lot, and she started talking about you, to her friends. My stomach clenched. What did she say? "It was awful, Mrs. Connie. She called you names. She said you were just a poor old woman from the Midwest who did not understand how the real world worked. She said that you dressed like you bought your clothes at a church rummage sale and that having you around was embarrassing. She laughed about how easy it was to cut you out of their lives, how Derek did not even put up a fight." I felt the blood drain from my face. And Derek? Where was Derek when she said all this? Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "He was right there, Mrs. Connie. He was standing next to her the whole time. He did not say anything. He just looked at the floor and let her talk." The silence stretched between us. I do not know how long I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I had just heard. My son. The boy I had rocked to sleep, nursed through fevers, cheered at every soccer game and school play. He had stood there and listened to his wife humiliate his mother, and he had said nothing. I am so sorry, Emma said finally. I know this is painful to hear, but I thought you should know what kind of person Andrea really is. And I think Derek has changed so much since he married her. He is not the same person anymore. She controls everything, his money, his time, his relationships. He is like a different man. Thank you, Emma. I said, my voice steady, even as my heart shattered. Thank you for telling me the truth. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time. The betrayal was complete now. It was not just that Andrea had excluded me. It was that Derek had allowed it, had participated in it through his silence. The son I loved had become a stranger who stood by while his mother was mocked and dismissed. But as the shock faded, something else emerged. A clarity I had not felt in months. I had been passive for too long, hoping Derek would come to his senses, trusting that love would be enough. But love alone was not enough when someone refused to see the truth. It was time to act. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I had worked with Robert for over 20 years, and he knew my finances inside and out. I explained what I needed. Documentation of the wire transfer I had made to Derek 2 years ago. Bank statements. Everything that proved where the money for the Aspen house had really come from. Robert did not ask questions. He simply said he would have everything ready within the week. Then I sat down at my desk and began to write. A letter to Derek. Not angry, not accusatory. Simply honest. I wrote about the day he was born, about the promise I made to always be there. I wrote about the years of sacrifice, the double jobs, the sleepless nights. I wrote about the watch I had bought for his birthday, still wrapped in my closet, and the photo album I had made with my own hands. And I wrote about the money, where it came from, why I had given it, what I had hoped it would mean for his future. I did not send the letter yet. I was not sure I ever would. But writing it helped. It helped me organize my thoughts, clarify my feelings, and prepare for what I knew I had to do next. I needed to confront them, both of them, not with anger, but with truth. And I needed to do it in person. I did not tell anyone I was coming. I booked a flight to Denver for a Saturday afternoon, rented a car at the airport, and drove straight to Derek and Andrea's house. It was a lovely neighborhood, all manicured lawns and expensive cars, the kind of place where people measured success by square footage and designer labels. I parked on the street and sat in the car for a moment, gathering my courage. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. But I thought about Harold, about the strength he had always shown, and I opened the door. The walk to their front door felt endless. I rang the bell and waited. Andrea opened the door. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face cycling through surprise, annoyance, and something that looked almost like fear. "Connie," she said flatly. "We were not expecting you." "I know," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "May I come in? I think we need to have a conversation. All three of us." She hesitated, clearly wanting to refuse. But before she could speak, Derek appeared behind her. His face went pale when he saw me. "Mum, what are you doing here?" I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in years. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished. The confident young man I had raised was gone, replaced by someone who glanced nervously at his wife before speaking. "I need to talk to both of you," I said. "It is important." "May I come in?" Derek looked at Andrea. She gave a tiny nod, her lips pressed into a thin line. They stepped aside to let me enter. The house was beautiful, of course. High ceilings, expensive furniture artwork on the walls. Andrea led us into the living room, where we sat on opposite sides of a glass coffee table. The distance between us felt like miles. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. I placed it on the table between us. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Derek shook his head, confusion written on his face. Andrea said nothing, but her eyes narrowed. These are bank records, I continued. Wire transfer confirmations. Documentation showing that 2 years ago I transferred $350,000 to an account in Derek's name. The money that paid off your debts. The money that bought this house in Aspen that you are so proud of. Andrea's face went white. Derek's jaw dropped. That is impossible, Andrea sputtered. Derek got a bonus. His investments paid off. He told me himself. I looked at my son. Did you tell her that Derek, he could not meet my eyes? He stared at the floor just as Emma had described him doing at the birthday party. Silent, passive, broken. I turned back to Andrea. Every dollar that bought that vacation home came from me. From decades of working 2 jobs, saving every penny, investing carefully. I gave it to Derek because he was desperate, because he had made mistakes and needed help. And I asked him not to tell you because I wanted to see who you really were when you believed I had nothing to offer. Andrea's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I know what you said about me at the birthday party, I continued. I know you called me a poor old woman who did not belong in your world. I know you laughed about cutting me out of my son's life. And I know that Derek stood there and said nothing while you humiliated the woman who gave up everything to raise him. Derek finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. Mum, I am so sorry. I did not know how to stop it. Andrea? She just took over everything, and I lost myself somewhere along the way. I was ashamed to face you. I let his words hang in the air for a moment. Then I spoke again, not to Derek, but to Andrea. I did not come here to take back my money. That was a gift to my son, and I do not regret giving it. But I did come here to tell you something, Andrea. You thought I was beneath you, because I live simply because I do not wear designer clothes or drive a luxury car. You looked at me and saw someone who did not matter. But the truth is, your entire lifestyle is built on my sacrifice. Every champagne toast in that Aspen house, every party you threw, every photo you posted was made possible by a poor old woman from Ohio who loves her son more than you could ever understand. Andrea said nothing. Her face was a mask of shock and shame. I stood up, reaching for the envelope. I will leave these documents with you. I think you need some time to discuss what you have learned. But I want to be clear about one thing. I did not come here for revenge. I came here for the truth. Because secrets poison everything, and I refuse to let my relationship with my son die in the shadows of lies. I walked toward the door. Derek stumbled after me. Mom, please, he begged. Do not leave like this. I need to fix this. I need to make this right. I paused at the door and turned to face him. You cannot fix anything today, Derek. You need to look at your life, really look at it, and decide what kind of man you want to be. I will always love you. That will never change. But I will not stand by and be treated as worthless. Not by anyone. Not even by you. And then I walked out, closing the door gently behind me. The drive back to the airport was a blur. I do not remember most of it. I just remember the feeling of finally having said the words that had been building inside me for so long. It was not joy, exactly. It was not even relief. It was something more complicated than that. A sense of having stood up for myself, yes, but also a deep sadness for what had been lost. The weeks that followed were difficult. I did not hear from Derek. I did not expect to, at least not right away. He had a lot to process, a lot to figure out. I threw myself into the things that brought me comfort. My garden, my friends, the volunteer work I did at the local library. I tried to fill my days with meaningful activity, but the emptiness was always there, lurking at the edges. Margaret was my rock during those weeks. She came over nearly every day, bringing casseroles and company, refusing to let me wallow alone. One afternoon, we were sitting on my porch watching the sunset when she asked me how I was really feeling. Honestly, I said, I feel lighter. Even with all the pain, I feel like I finally put down a weight I had been carrying for years. I was so afraid of losing Derek that I kept silent when I should have spoken. I let Andrea push me out of his life because I thought that was what he wanted. But the truth is, I was not helping him by staying quiet. I was enabling a situation that was destroying both of us. Margaret nodded slowly. And now I wait. I hope. But I do not beg. I have too much respect for myself for that. 3 months passed, autumn turned to winter, and snow began to fall on my garden. I had almost given up hope when on a cold December afternoon I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Derek standing on my porch. He was alone. He looked thinner than I remembered, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But there was also something different about him, a clarity in his gaze that had been missing for years. "Mum," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word and let him enter. We sat in my living room, the same room where he had opened birthday presents as a child, where we had laughed together and cried together and built a lifetime of memories. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Derek broke the silence. "Andrea and I are separating. We have been in counselling for the past few months, trying to work through everything. But the truth is, I do not think there is anything left to save. The person I became when I was with her, that is not who I am. That is not who you raised me to be." I listened without interrupting. "I am so ashamed of how I treated you." He continued, his voice breaking. "You gave me everything. Your whole life was about making sure I had what I needed. And I repaid you by letting my wife humiliate you, by choosing her approval over your love. I do not know if you can ever forgive me, but I had to come here and tell you how sorry I am. I had to look you in the eyes and say the words." I reached out and took his hand. "Derek, I forgave you a long time ago. That is what mothers do. We forgive. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean going back to the way things were. You have to earn back trust. That takes time." "I know," he whispered. "I know it does. And I am willing to do whatever it takes." We talked for hours that day. He told me about the counselling sessions, about the slow unravelling of his marriage, about the hard work of examining his own choices and taking responsibility for them. He told me that Andrea had fought against the separation, at first terrified of losing the lifestyle she had built. But eventually, even she had to admit that their relationship was beyond repair. "The Aspen house," he said at one point, "we are selling it. I wanted to give you back the money, or at least some of it, but I know you will probably refuse." I smiled. "You know me well." "I do, Mum. At least I am starting to again." The divorce was finalised 6 months later. I did not take any pleasure in it, despite everything Andrea had done. Divorce is always a kind of failure, a dream that did not come true. But I also knew it was necessary. Derek could not become the man he was meant to be while shackled to someone who brought out his worst qualities. The healing process was slow for both of us. Derek moved back to Ohio, taking a job with a smaller company closer to home. He visited me often sometimes, just sitting in the garden while I worked, not saying much, just being present. We were rebuilding something that had been damaged, laying new foundations on ground that had been shaken. And then came Derek's 39th birthday. It was nothing like the lavish party Andrea had thrown the year before. No Aspen house, no champagne, no designer clothes or important colleagues. Just the two of us in my kitchen with a chocolate cake I had baked myself and 39 candles flickering in the evening light. Derek closed his eyes to make a wish, and when he opened them, there were tears on his cheeks. "This is perfect, Mom," he said. This is what I missed. This is what matters. We ate cake and looked through the photo album I had made, the one that had been gathering dust in my closet since last year's cancelled celebration. We laughed at the old pictures, at his chubby baby face and his awkward teenage years. We remembered Harold and the birthdays he had shared with us before he was taken too soon. We remembered all the years of struggle and sacrifice and love. At the end of the night, as Derek was getting ready to leave, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. "Thank you, Mum," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for telling the truth, even when it was hard. Thank you for being my mother." I held him close, this boy who had grown into a man who had lost his way and found it again. And I knew in that moment that everything I had been through was worth it. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every tear. Because a mother's love is not just about giving, it is also about having the courage to demand what is right. As I cleaned up the kitchen that night, I thought about what I had learned from this whole painful journey. I learned that love without boundaries is not love at all. I learned that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, can poison the people we are trying to protect. I learned that standing up for yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. And I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth. Not the truth as a weapon, but the truth as a light. A light that shows the way forward when everything seems lost in darkness. Derek and I have a different relationship now than we did before. It is more honest, more equal. He does not need me to protect him anymore, and I do not need him to validate my worth. We are two adults who love each other, who have hurt each other, and who have chosen to move forward together anyway. That is the real gift. Not money, not houses, not parties or possessions. Just the simple, profound miracle of human beings choosing to love each other despite everything that tries to tear them apart. I am 67 years old now. I have lived through joy and sorrow, through triumph and heartbreak. I have learned that the world does not always reward kindness, that people can be cruel, that the ones we love most can hurt us most deeply. But I have also learned that healing is possible, that relationships can be restored, that it is never too late to speak the truth and demand the respect you deserve. If you are watching this and you have ever felt invisible, overlooked, or taken for granted by the people who should love you most, I want you to know that you are not alone. And I want you to know that you have the right to stand up. You have the right to be seen. You have the right to refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to confront someone who underestimated you? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a situation where staying silent would have been easier? Share your story in the comments below. Let us build a community of people who support each other, who remind each other that we matter. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. If you want to hear more stories about resilience, truth, and the power of family, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And please share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. You never know whose life you might change with a simple click. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening to an old woman from Ohio tell her story. I wish you peace. I wish you strength. And most of all, I wish you the courage to speak your truth, whatever that may be. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.